Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Textile webinar series by the Washington State Department of Ecology's Recycling and Market Development Center. This session is called Cut from the Same Cloth, Level Setting, and is the first of 4 webinars in the series. My name is T, my pronouns are he, she, they, and I'll be your host and through line for all 4 webinars. Today I'll be co-hosting this webinar with Mick from the University of Oregon, who will be presenting on textile circularity later. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself and a bit more about this particular session. So I'm a social entrepreneur working at the intersection of fashion, sustainability, justice, and education. My startup is called Reform U, and we use education as a tool for personal and systemic transformation. And the online course is called A Personal Guide to Sustainable Style. And I'm currently designing some custom GPTs to help reduce consumption. So I work kind of on the demand side of the equation with consumers or everyday citizens, but we need supply, demand, and policy to work in tandem. So I'm really excited to see diverse backgrounds and approaches convening today. I'm also 1/3 of a collective known as Sustainable Style Seattle. We're hosting 7 free community events throughout May, sponsored by the City of Seattle, including a clothing swap this weekend, a repair and mending workshop, an upcycling workshop, and a fashion show. And I'd like to personally invite you to attend and share these events with your respective communities. And I'll drop a link in the chat later. Now switching gears to a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar is being recorded. Once it's edited for accessibility, we'll post it on Ecology's YouTube channel and share the link through the Recycling Market Development Center's newsletter and website. If you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A box instead of the chat. It'll help us keep things organized, and we'll get to as many questions as we can towards the end. Please also use the upvote feature so we can see what questions most people would like to have answered. We also do encourage that you use the chat to connect to the community, ask each other questions, share reflections, and drop any helpful resources for the group. To respect everyone's privacy, we kindly ask that AI note takers like otter.ai not be used. While we are recording the session, it's done with clear expectations and limited access. Third-party tools capture information in ways we can't fully monitor, and we want this to be a space where people feel comfortable participating in. We'll have a short 5-minute bio break later on, but please take care of yourself whenever you need to. And finally, we'd really appreciate your feedback. We'll drop a short survey link in the chat throughout the session. Your thoughts help us improve and plan future webinars. So thanks again for being here, and we're excited to get started. So here's a quick look at the agenda and what we'll cover today. We'll start with an overview from Megan Davis at the Recycling Market Development Center, who produced this webinar series. Then we'll hear from my co-host, Mick at the University of Oregon, who will introduce the concept of circularity and how it applies to textiles. After that, we'll move into shared definitions and key terms with Eileen Mockus from Accelerating Circularity. Then Sydney Munoz, Manager of Sustainability at Goodwill Industries International, Stephen Bethell from Bank and Vogue, and Kerwin Pyle, King County Environmental Programs Managing Supervisor, will have a panel discussion on the end-of-life textile pathways, from donation to export to landfill. We'll leave time for Q&A and reflections, so please add your questions for the speakers to the Q&A when you think of them, and also use the upvote, the thumbs up icon next to the questions you want answered. Now I'm going to pass it off to someone who needs no introduction, Kara.
Thanks, T. Hey, I appreciate that. I know Megan was going to be the original introducer, but I asked her to let me do the Recycling Market Development Center promo. So this webinar is brought to you today from Washington State Department of Ecology, but from the Recycling Market Development Center. We're a sort of subset. We're employees of Ecology. Our organization was created in 2019, right after the China sword shutdown that caused recyclables in the state of Washington to be sent to the landfill. So the legislature said, hey, ecology, let's look at what we can do about boosting recycling markets in the state of Washington to counter what we are seeing going overseas. So that's sort of kind of why we're here. What our focus is listed here on the slide. Legislature gave us pretty wide sweeping discretion looking into research, development, policy, marketing. We do operate with a 14-member amazing advisory board. Those advisory board meetings are open to anyone who's interested in attending. We'll get a QR code for you on a later slide. And we're also partnered with our favorite sibling agency, the Department of Commerce. So Caleb, if you can go to the next slide. I'm not sure who's managing the slides. There you go. So this is our team. We're a mighty team of 6. What do they say? Small but mighty. The Recycling Market Development Center is an ecology organization, but we partner with Department of Commerce. The 4 ecology folks are myself, Maya, Tina, and Megan. Our areas of interest focus in on data, research, innovations, outreach, and policy. We are more of the recycling side of the Market Development Center, and Leslie and Kirk are our partners on the commerce side. They're more in business assistance, economic development, that sort of thing. So there are a couple of other states in the US that also do recycling market development. And I have to say that Washington State does it best because we're the only state that partners ecology with commerce. So when you call the Market Development Center, you get 2 agencies at the price of 1 email or 1 phone call. So give us a ring. Let us know when you need some assistance. We're here for you. And the next slide is the 4 tenets that sort of direct our work. We've been doing this for about 5 years. A couple of years ago, we started to really focus in on what it is that we do. We have the ability to bring people together. We're sort of a party that doesn't have an opinion. We're here to help. We're here to provide information, research. This webinar is a perfect example of the kind of work that we do, convening groups to talk about sticky problems and discuss potential solutions. We also love innovative approaches. We have put our efforts behind a couple of innovations that I'll talk about in a second. Of course, our partners at Commerce are specialists in business assistance. And then who doesn't love a deep dive into data and some research? In the past 5 years, the Recycling Market Development Center has put $2.6 million of available state funds into 91 different projects. I'm not going to go over them all, but I'm going to give you a taste of a few of those in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. We'll give you a little primer. I'm doing this on behalf of Leslie Perkins. So Leslie will wave her hand in the air if I do anything wrong. Department of Commerce focuses on strengthening communities and growing the economy. They provide resources and funding support across the state of Washington. This slide gives you a small snip into the things that you can get when you call up their Office of Economic Development and Competitiveness. Go to choosewashingtonstate.com and you can see more. They're a great resource for ecology as they're the business side of the Market Development Center. So it's really nice having them as a partner in our group. And then the next slide is sort of Leslie's shining moment. The Industrial Symbiosis Program's been operating for a couple of years. They've invested $5 million in 27 projects. They're super proud of them. Leslie's currently managing, I think, a group of 12 or 13 projects that have to wrap up their innovative work by June 30th. So look forward to the results from those innovations in symbiosis and circular economy. Next slide gives you just a quick view of our efforts in the Next Cycle Washington Innovative Circular Economy Accelerator. It's a business accelerator that supports the growth of innovative organizations that improve circularity. It tends to look at scaling projects that are looking at waste prevention, reuse, repair, recycling, composting. It's a 6-month program that provides these organizations, it can be businesses, community groups, nonprofits. They get 6 months of technical support from a group of stellar consultants that help them refine their work, figure out what they need to do, help them solve problems. And they wrap it up with a pitch competition with prizes of money. So it's worth their time and effort, and they're absolutely amazing to watch. The next pitch event for the current cohort of 16 really innovative projects is happening Monday, May 19th in Airway Heights at the Northern Quest Casino, where I really encourage you to join. Check out the link that Myhre put in the chat. It's inspiring. I think I've been to several of them, and those are pretty amazing events to see what people with a great idea are trying to accomplish. Next slide gives you just a taste of what we do in the convening space. As I said before, we have a 14-member advisory board. We convene every quarter, every 3 months, third first Wednesday of the month from 9 to 11:30. Each one of those meetings is open to anyone who wants to join. They're all on Zoom. Click on that QR code and you go to our email subscription page. Usually only pop out a message once a month, once every other month. Leading up to this event has been a little bit more because we have such a robust series of textiles events. But every meeting focuses on a unique material. We bring experts in that arena to present to our board members and share information. So keep an eye on us. And if you have an idea, give us a call. We're always looking for good ideas. We also do other engagement efforts. This webinar series is one of them. We've also presented to local community meetings, conducted facility tours, and hosted, like this event, material topic discussions. Let's go to the next slide, which I think is my last. The other things we like to do, Myhre and I are both data nerds. We love to measure things, and if you don't measure it, you can't track it. You can't improve it if you don't know what you have. We've already conducted some material market research studies into recycling paper, glass, and plastic packaging. Those are available on our Recycling Market Development Center Advisory Board website. We've also done a dive into mattress recycling, agricultural plastics, which is a unique idea, and then textiles. One of the reasons why we're here today is because we have Megan Davis on our team, and she said, hey, let's look into textiles. We generally find our area at the Market Development Center is those odd materials you see in the waste stream that are really challenging. And so Megan took a deep dive into textiles and met with an amazing group of innovators in that space, some of whom you'll hear throughout this webinar series. And I want to give my heartfelt thanks to Megan and Myhre for their work in this space and for convening this group. You'll see more from Megan in just a sec. But I want to say thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing the rest of this webinar series. And at this point, I believe I hand it over to Megan. Megan Davis needs no introduction.
Thanks for that, Kara. So yes, like Kara said, I started the Recycling Market Development Center about 1.5 years ago. And that's exactly what I said was, hey, what about textiles? So I was tasked with not only the topic of textiles, but the scope of work that includes environmentally preferable purchasing. And so through the last year, I've sort of merged and evolved the two together and come up with a circular procurement pilot program that works across state agencies. And what it does is to identify products that can be put into our state contracts that are environmentally preferable, purchased through recycled content and or reduction of toxics or local businesses. And so it's still in the works, but I'd love to see a textile a circular procurement pilot soon. Next slide. So leaning into the core pillars from the Recycling Market Development Center, we've been able to pull some of the businesses in our innovative sector. So these folks are highlighted. They have gone through the Next Cycle program, and we're very proud of their work and excited to see the future of how they scale up. Next slide. So again, like Kara mentioned, we lean a lot into research and data. These numbers are from our waste characterization study statewide that was done in 2020, 2021. And as you can see, through the 3 definitions in textiles, there's about a 4%, 3.9% total volume within the full waste characterization. And what that tells us more than anything would be that next slide, that we're missing data. So there's a lot of, we don't have the authority and or requirements to get any of our export data or incineration There's no way to measure or track thrift market data. And also for the reuse and repair, there's no system in place that identifies the economic values of clothing swaps or repairing events, things of that nature. So it's really a focus moving forward is to figure out ways to fund and figure out these missing data gaps. Next slide. So I think that the most important piece in all of this is understanding the textile industry as a complex system. And I knew when I started that there was no way that I could do this on my own. And I really leaned into support and help from others. So asking questions, asking for help, initiating conversations. I have met so many people along my journey, and they are absolutely a part of this process, even if I don't get to thank them individually. But all of the information sharing, all of the synergy, all of the magic that's happened has really evolved into this web series that I'm excited to share. It also put us on the path, working with Maya Kaisers, my steadfast coworker, to facilitate a co-design team. Next slide. So these wonderful humans over the last 6-7 months have been diligently working and along our learning curve of bringing external folks into the process of developing something. We've identified through the beginning to end of textiles as we see it and what we wanted to share, and that's what's we're here for today. So next slide. Well, the next 4 slides, I'll talk about the 4-part series. So we're here today to kind of do some level setting. Next slide. On Thursday, I hope you'll join us for business transformation, looking at local businesses and really doing some hands-on, kind of developing some kind of solutions around barriers to the problem and maybe financial and or infrastructure, things of that nature. So next slide. Our third webinar is also adopting new innovations, so technology in the space that makes it possible to actually recycle textiles. Be great, that'll be next week. And lastly, I'm mostly excited about this last webinar to really bring community together. So to kind of, even though each webinar is can stand alone, it's really built to kind of this place where there's a level setting and an understanding of what's needed, barriers and solutions. And then in this section, we'll talk about, we'll touch on policy, but also bringing community together and breaking down those silos and working together to really solve for this complex problem. So with that, I will hand it back over to T, and you can introduce our speaker, Carly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for grounding us in the why behind this work and for producing this series. It's clear that textiles are an important and growing focus for Washington's circular economy, and we appreciate the vision and leadership coming from the Recycling Market Development Center. So now I'm super excited to welcome my co-host, Carly Mick, Director of the Sports Product Design Program at the University of Oregon. Carly will walk us through the concept of circularity, what it means, how it applies to textiles, and why it's a critical lens for rethinking how materials move through our economy. She brings a strong design and systems thinking perspective, which is key to understanding how we shift from linear to circular approaches. We'll leave 5 minutes at the end for your questions, so feel free to drop those into the Q&A as we go. Welcome, Carly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, T, and thank everyone who has put a bunch of work into this webinar. It has been so exciting to meet all of the folks that we have met, that we've identified the speakers for this webinar, and also just the hard work that's going on in the background to make this happen. So I really appreciate all of your time. So today I really want to talk to you about making sense of circularity. And Caleb, if you don't mind advancing the slide, that'd be great. So making sense of circularity is, this is a concept that we're using in terms of our products across various industries, but in textiles in particular is what we're talking about today. So I'm going to try and condense that down and really give you a framework to allow you to understand a lot of the information that's going to be presented over the course of this webinar. So that's one of my goals today. And I'm also going to talk to you specifically about textiles, because there's a lot of verbiage and technology that can be very confusing if you don't have a background on this. So my goal here is to really help narrow that scope and allow you to engage fully with the presenters and the work that you're going to be hearing throughout all 4 of these webinars. And then finally, I want to help you understand what happens once we sort of release our textiles back into the world, because there's whole systems going on in the background. So we're going to be talking to 3 members of the sort of post-consumer market at the end of this webinar today. So this just gives you a sense of where we're going over the course of the next couple of hours. So next slide, please. So there is a lot happening in the world, and these are the kind of images that we're seeing around textile waste. And I want to highlight this because this is where a lot of people start. They see these very emotional moments and want to get engaged. And we have the opportunity to be like, we need to recycle textiles. But I also want you to know that for this one and the next slide, this is in Chile as well. We're seeing the stuff, but it is just a place to start. And so if you go to the next slide, it's important to understand that this kind of emotional reaction that we have to it is important. This is a galvanizing moment that we can bring our energy to making change in the world. But it's easy to get stuck in a very superficial reaction to how we want to respond to this. Recycling is one of the ways that we deal with the products that are in our lives right now. But I want to highlight that there are a lot of resources that go into making our textiles. So in the most sort of baseline sense, we can see that there's land that goes into growing cotton, there is fossil fuels that go into shipping it, there's fossil fuels that go into, say, heating the water for dyeing. So there's all these resources that are part of what brings a garment to life. But what we need to understand is that only a very small fraction of those resources are still existing in the t-shirt that you receive. So here's some data that just sort of puts this in perspective. And again, it's worth highlighting, we don't really have great numbers around this stuff. So these are some good estimates that I found from reliable people, but we can think about this as sort of fundamentally true without being perfectly accurate. So when we go through all of the global impacts, the environmental impacts of a product, we can say for a garment, 85% of those environmental impacts happen in the manufacturing stage. Now, I think we could probably generalize this and say, let's say 10% of the resources are still present in your t-shirt when you receive it. Now, when you dispose of that, if you dispose of it responsibly or if you dispose of it irresponsibly, you are only affecting really 10% of the challenge that we're facing. And I think this image that we have here from Electrify Now puts this in perspective. So if we threw away all of this garbage, it is actually only having the same environmental impact as burning 25 pounds, or sorry, 1 gallon of gasoline, which will create 25 pounds of CO2. So it's worth considering that although disposal is important, there is much more work to be done. And I think that this is important to highlight because it gives us opportunities to do that work. So next slide, please. When we think about the sort of classic framework of how we deal with our products, we think about this reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Like we've all grown up with this phrasing. And I want to highlight here that there's already kind of a hierarchy. We want to reduce, then we want to reuse, then we want to recycle. And so there are 2 concepts that I want you to understand in this. One is called waste hierarchy, which you'll hear more from Eileen about that sort of concept. And it's one of the key principles in circularity. And then the other one, so this idea of reduce, reuse, recycle is called the 3 R's framework. And the 3Rs framework builds the basis for a lot of how we discuss circularity. Next slide, please. So what I've done here is I've taken this concept, this 3Rs framework, and I've reframed it for our textile discussion. Now, I did not invent this framework, and this is based on something known as the butterfly diagram that happens in a lot of circularity documentation, but I have condensed it and simplified it for our discussion today. So basically what I want you to understand in looking at this is that we are trying to keep our objects as close to the user as possible. So if you purchase a t-shirt, you love that t-shirt, you wear that t-shirt, you launder that t-shirt, and you do that as much as you can, and you don't buy a new t-shirt because you have a t-shirt you love. And as long as you are doing that and not buying a new t-shirt, then we are making positive change in the world. But let's say you get to the end of wanting that t-shirt and you want to release it and perhaps get something else, or whatever the reasons that you no longer need this t-shirt, but it's still wearable. So at that point, we can send it out into the world, we can give it to thrift, we can have a clothing swap, however you decide to dispose of it, then that t-shirt can go to somebody else who then owns it, loves it, launders it, and keeps it for as long as possible and doesn't buy a new t-shirt. So this gives us the opportunity to bring it back to the user and then keep it as close to the user as possible. Now, if we do this as many times as we possibly can, eventually that t-shirt no longer functions as a t-shirt, and we can start looking to reuse it for its parts. So potentially this is using it as shop rags. And if you purchase a box of shop rags made from old t-shirts, now you can use and launder and love and own those shop rags for as long as possible and not buy new shop rags. And then finally, after those things have disintegrated, then we take it to the sort of fiber recycling. And if we can continue to keep this sort of circular process as close to the user as possible, we now have a framework that we can start discussing our hierarchy of waste. Next slide. And I want to give you this outline because I'm basically trying to build for you a filing cabinet in your brain where you can start organizing the information you're going to learn throughout this webinar. So we have our hierarchy of waste, but we also have the users, the actors that are participating in this system. And I've broken that down for you into these three categories. So first of all is the consumer, like what we can do as individuals to make change. And that will come in our purchasing behavior, care and maintenance, how we dispose of our garments. Then we have it from the brand perspective. And this is how we design, how we manufacture. We can make impacts as to how people maintain their garment, how we can make sure we bring it back and keep it close to the user. And then I've created sort of a broad category, which is the things that are that require systems to implement. So this is our legislative and policy processes. This is collection, where we are talking to a lot of different people. We're working in the context of our cities. So these are sort of a broad array of actors, but I've sort of highlighted it as kind of the societal lens. So as we go through this, I will show you some of the work that's happening at the consumer level, the brand level, and the society level, and in the context of this waste hierarchy with our textiles. So this is the framework I want you to use as you go through this webinar. And as we have our speakers presenting, you can now sort of drop in the information that you're getting into these various categories. Next slide. So from the user perspective, we need, as consumers, to start rethinking our philosophy of stuff to this idea of fewer, nicer things. We can own things that are lovely, that are perfect, that make our lives rich and interesting. It's not about owning nothing. It's about owning the things that you will love and cherish and continue to use. As a brand, we need to understand that we can design for durability and we can design for repairability. We need these things to stay in the context of our user in such a way that they can not buy other things for as long as possible. We also have the opportunity to change how brands make money so that we have things like owned repair, where we can now hire our brands to fix our clothes and also start buying used clothes directly from them. So brands have a large role to play in this. And then from a societal perspective, we need to actually make repairing easier to access and more affordable. So this is in education, this is in incentivizing via our Extended Producer Responsibility Acts. And you're going to hear a lot more about that in webinar 4. So I'm not going to take it over right now, but just know that there is this concept called EPR, which is a big part of the policy making that we can do. And it basically incentivizes longevity in our garments. Next slide. So from the resale perspective, again, as consumers, we have the opportunity to start destigmatizing the concept of used goods, like finding these things that are high quality, that make our lives wonderful, and appreciating them for the objects that they are without needing them to be new to somehow have value to us. We need to understand what to do with our products when we're done with them, such that we are optimized for the system of circularity. And from a brand perspective, again, we have the opportunity to own our own resale and really create business models that are focused around service instead of product. And from a societal perspective, we can ease collection, we can ease sorting, and we can financially incentivize resale over first use products. And we can do this through our EPRs, but we can also do this through how we tax and organize our disposal process. So there's opportunities at every level in resale as well. Next slide. From the repurposing, this becomes more challenging and we see less influence of the consumer at this level, and we start seeing more influence around the societal levels and the brand levels. So we really need to think about decommissioning our products. There's a challenge that a lot of brands have where their products are covered in logos, and they don't necessarily want those products to be taken apart and put back together in such a way that their logos and their products are no longer appropriate to their brand. So if you are a brand and you have concerns about this, designing ways into your product where you can decommission them, you can remove the branding, you can allow them to be repaired without basically allowing your brand to turn into something else, to turn into a raw material that can be used for other people's branding. This is something that we can do to really change our priorities around how we dispose of our textiles, as well as designing for disassembly. From the societal perspective, we have facilitating collections and sorting technology, as well as disassembling technology. We don't have a lot going on right now about being able to take off trims and buttons and zippers and all of the other things. And so there's opportunity for innovation from a machine perspective here as well. Next slide. And when we get all the way out to the recycling level, one of the things I really want to highlight for you is this great quote that I found, which is, the longer products, materials, and resources are expected to recirculate and remain in the value chain, the more important it becomes to avoid contamination with hazardous materials in the first place. So there are roughly 15,000 different known chemicals that are used in the textiling process, and a fair amount of those are considered toxic in some way or another. And that could be very toxic, or that could be minorly toxic. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time feeling anxious about the textiles that we're using and wearing, but I do think that we need to acknowledge that we don't know what's in them. And when we learn about certain chemical contaminants that may be in our clothes or our carpets or the things that we live with in our house and on our bodies, we have a really hard time tracing that in the world that we live in right now. And so traceability is going to be one of the best things that we can do to understand the chemical impacts of the textile work that we're doing right now. And from the perspective of circularity, again, the more we're trying to reuse these materials, the longer those chemicals are going to be in our textiles, in our next product, and in the world around us. So first and foremost, I just want to highlight traceability is going to be key in our industry in the upcoming years. Next slide. So from the recycling perspective, we really need to start legislating traceability. We need to legislate end markets for creating opportunities to purchase things that are made from recycled textiles. We need more sorting technology. You'll hear more about this later. There's a lot of opportunities for optimizing that, and we have a few coming online right now, but there is more work to be done here. And we also need to work with our brands to make sure that that traceability happens and to start sourcing some of these recycled materials. So it's an opportunity for brands to really focus on developing these end markets. And as a consumer, we need to know when it's appropriate to have our textiles go into a recycling facility as opposed to reuse. Next slide. So just to sort of summarize these things, I just want to say that we are focused on creating fewer, nicer things in the world. This is just something we can all do, and we can all sort of reframe our thinking around. I believe strongly that the only way we're going to do this work is through cross-industry collaboration. So this means that we need to be talking to people at opposite ends of the textile industry. So if you are a waste collector, you have information that would help brands design better for the waste handling process. If you are a consumer, then you need to be able to tell your legislator what's important to you, right? We need to be talking to each other, and we need to be developing this collaboration. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do in these webinars, is give people shared vocabulary, give people the opportunity to connect, and also understand what work is happening and what work is available to be done. So this can really allow us as individuals to find where we can be effective in the system and then lean into that. So next slide. What I want to do next is give you sort of an overview of textiles themselves, because I just gave you a list. Oh yeah, here's some work to be done, right? But in some ways it's almost glib of me to say it that way, because even something as simple as sorting textiles for recycling, that sorting technology piece, is so complicated. And so I'm going to give you just a little overview so that you not only have the vocabulary, but you also understand how this can be challenging and why there is so much work to be done here. So what I have here are the types of textiles. You can basically categorize almost all textiles as some version of these three things. So from the synthetic side, that's roughly 64% of the fiber market is synthetics, and that is polyester and nylon primarily. There are other synthetics for sure, but if you only know polyester and nylon, that's all you really need to worry about. So this is a huge portion of the materials that we see out in the world, and it's worth noting that from a recycling perspective. Then I'm going to jump over to natural fibers. So in natural fibers, there's roughly two categories. There's the cellulosic fibers, which are things that grow on plants. And then there are proteins, which are the things that grow on animals. So in our natural fibers, we have basically roughly 29% of the fiber market is natural fibers. And there are variations. Obviously, there's different ones here, but these are our primary ones that we see. Cotton, linen, jute, wool, silk, cashmere, but cotton is really the big player in this space. So if you remember nothing else, natural fibers are mostly made up of cotton in terms of what we look at from a textile recycling perspective. And then we have this very interesting category called semi-synthetics. And a lot of what this is regenerated cellulose. So there's a process where you can take any kind of cellulose, that could be old textiles, but it could also be wood pulp. It could be bamboo. It could be any of these various cellulosic materials, and you dissolve it in a chemical bath, and it turns into this sort of like gushy slurry. And then you can re-extrude that into basically monofilaments, these very fine materials that are almost like silk. And so that's where we get our rayon, our viscose, lyocell, tencel, modal, acetate, like all of these are names not for different materials, but for different chemical processes. And so people actually own the chemical process that makes any one of these materials, but you can roughly lump them into the same category. And from an environmental perspective, these can be really terrible in the sense that the chemistry being used is extremely toxic and then being disposed of in irresponsible ways. Or it can be, you can capture and reuse that chemistry, and it can be quite safe and quite sustainable. So it really runs the gamut. And I also think it's worth highlighting here that there's another version of semi-synthetics, which is this like mushroom leathers and these various other composite materials that we're seeing. And they also bring together kind of an interesting combination of these that we can lump into this sort of semi-synthetic category. Next slide, please. So now that we understand kind of the types of textiles, it's worth understanding the types of recycling that's out there as well. So one of the most common, we have our mechanical recycling. So we're really just shredding it into fibers and then respinning it into new yarn. This is not very common. Like, we're seeing more and more of this come online, but a very small percentage of textiles gets recycled at all. And then of those textiles that are getting recycled, it would be one of these four categories. So that's mechanical recycling. Chemical recycling is where we actually dissolve it. So this would be something akin to that regenerative cellulose that we talked about before. That's how we may recycle a cotton in a chemical manner. We also have opportunities to do something similar with a polyester or other synthetics. And then from the thermal side, we can, I mean, a lot of polyester and nylon is plastics anyways. We can just melt those down and do things with that melted plastic. So that would be potentially a thermal recycling methodology. But it's also worth knowing that a lot of what we do here is just combustion. We are basically capturing the energy from that by burning it. So that is another way that people talk about sort of thermal recycling in this space. And then we also have sort of our classic composting. But it's worth noting that just because something is a natural fiber does not mean it's compostable. It really depends on what's on it, because it could retard composting, it could be mixed with things, it could also leave chemical traces in the ground that would then make the ground unusable. So it's worth just considering how we engage with composting and not just believing, oh, it's cotton, I can put it in my backyard. Next slide. So as a layperson, how do you even know what a textile is made out of, right? Like, it takes years of experience sometimes to even be able to identify these things. But I want to highlight a couple of things. It is, in the United States, it is mandated that we have tags on our garment that highlight what a garment is made out of. Now, that has to be in one of two places. It would either be the center back, so in a shirt, that would be the center back neck, or it will be the center back waist. And it will also be on the left-hand side seam. So it will be in one of these two places. You can always look at the label and see if something's on there. Now, the information that you get is not always perfect. As you can see from this example that I stole, it can be confusing. It can be slightly inaccurate. There's a lot going on in that labeling. Next slide. So the federal regulations that happen around labeling, I just want to highlight a couple of things. If there is less than 5% of any given fiber or textile, you don't actually even have to call out what it is. You can just call it other. So you could have something that is 5% other, whatever that means. There's also the trims and decorations are exempt. So up to 15% of the surface could be covered with, say, sequins. And that would not be included in the material of the garment, which means that when you go to recycle something, up to 15% of the surface could be something else. And that's just the surface area. It is not even necessarily the weight of the garment. So there is some variations that can make recycling this very challenging. But if you do manage to recycle it, it could be as much as, as the whole garment could be made out of undetermined fiber content. So it is perfectly legal to shred something up, not know what you shredded up, and put it back together into something new. And we can just say it's undetermined. So we can do this right now. We don't need any sort of legislative change to use our used textiles in these sort of interesting and elaborate ways. 100% means supposedly that it is actually 100% something. So that means you're not having that 5% that is potentially something else. Now, it's very hard to check these things, so who knows? But technically, that is how it is supposed to be. But there's also all kinds of interesting exemptions. So things like clip-on ties don't need to have any labeling. Neither do diaper liners, which I think is interesting. And then hand-woven rugs by Navajo Indians, I think, is another interesting exemption. They clearly had some good lobbying at this moment, and they were just like, no, we're not labeling our rugs. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we need to think about with our recycling challenge is, yes, we have these three categories. However, if you take fiber content from, let's say, polyester fiber and cotton fiber, you can mix that fiber all by itself and then start making a yarn out of it, out of a blend of these two things. That is what's known as an intimate blend. So you have a thread that is made out of an intimate blend. Next slide. Then you can weave those threads into a variety of fabrics. So now we have something like, let's say it is semi-synthetic in one direction and a blend of cotton and polyester in the other direction. Now we have all three categories of our materials that has no, like we can't pull it apart in any way. They are not individualized. It is fully contained within the fabric itself, all three of these different materials. Next slide. So then we take those materials, we dye them different colors, we put finishing, we put coating on them, and none of this stuff is documented anywhere. So now who knows what all is a part of these individual fabrics? Next slide. Then we take these fabrics and we mix them with a bunch of other fabrics. Every garment usually has these layers of different materials, and each one of them could have this, like, they could have intimate blends in their yarn, they could have different weave structures, they could have all sorts of different materials coming together. And then next slide, we also have all of the trims. So if you think about the bra cups that are in something, so now we've introduced foam and it's sandwiched between layers of material. We have boning, we have interfaces, we have hooks, we have buttons, we have zippers, we have ribbons, and none of those things are called out either, and they are all securely attached to our garment. So if we're trying to break this thing up or even sort our clothes into different categories, we have some serious challenges to overcome. Next slide. So in addition to all of that, we are also, especially in sportswear, which is the industry that I am most focused on, we're doing a lot of bonding. So now we're layering in glues and other materials that make this even more challenging to disassemble. So as you can see, like I just went through this whole process of explaining what the work to be done is in this whole category, but in one tiny piece of that, which is just our sorting technology, all of these other things need to be understood and navigated. So this is a life's work for an awful lot of people just to be able to recycle these individual components. Next slide. So I just wanted to give you guys this opportunity to have kind of a framework for understanding both the information that you're going to be receiving throughout this webinar, but also understanding how challenging this work is. And unlike, say, the cosmetic industry, we have not even gotten to the point of documenting what is in our products, let alone being able to utilize them effectively in our circular economy. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Carly. So we do have a few questions in the chat. So just to kind of help expedite, I am going to ask the questions on behalf of the audience. Please feel free to upvote now. But we have one from Juan. How does a private business fit into a circular model? We have some textiles used in our clean rooms, i.e. gowns, beard and hair nets, but haven't found a proper way to recycle them yet, since most of the items have an elastic component. I would love to hear of resources or orgs who would be able to recycle and participate in the symbiotic system. Sustainability is built one stitch at a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. And I really think that this is the challenge that we're all facing, right? Is that we have more supply than demand right now. We are generating more textiles than we know what to do with. And we want to sustainably dispose of our textiles, but it's extremely challenging because we are not utilizing those disposed textiles into anything very effectively. So honestly, I think the best thing that we can do, especially in this particular example, is to start thinking about how we can purchase recycled materials and how we can use less of the things that we are using right now. So being able to I don't know this exact situation, but if there's a way to use these things longer or more repeatedly, or potentially partner with other parts of the supply chain where you can find people who are building something and their output is something that could be your input or vice versa. But that requires exactly the kind of collaboration that we're trying to do in this webinar. And I think this is a great question because I think it highlights fundamentally the challenge. We don't have an answer to that. There is no straightforward thing that we are doing right now. And we need the work that everyone in this space is doing to make that happen. So thank you for participating. And I'm sorry there isn't a better answer.
All right, the next question is from Adam. Carly, can you speak a little bit more about an EPR, extended producer responsibility for textile policy incentives, or incentivizes the longevity of garments? Would that be through eco-modulation?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too deep into this because you will have webinar 4 will focus heavily in this space. But really, an EPR is the idea that if you sell something, and in this case, we're talking about the state of Washington. So let's say if you sold something in the state of Washington, you have some responsibility to deal with its end of life. So the way that sort of works is that people who sell in the state of Washington pay into an organization that then those funds get used to help the recycling process and to help sort of build this sort of circularity framework for dealing with the waste that is generated through that purchasing process. So based on how much you charge and what exemptions there are, so let's say if you were selling used goods, perhaps you are totally exempt from this. But if you are selling first use goods, then perhaps you are not exempt from this. So it's a legislative tool that people can use to modulate behavior in terms of the people who are selling goods. And then it also allows the people who are dealing with end market work to have the funds necessary to do that work. So you'll hear more about this. There's a lot of subtleties in there, but that's kind of the brief overview.
Awesome. The next one is coming from Emery. Isn't the impact of toxins on a textile product reduced when washed and reused several times, taking the case of longevity?
Potentially. So what toxicity is, well, actually, no, I'm going to say like what harm comes from chemicals is actually a number of different things. So durability is one of them. So if just chemicals exist in the environment for a long time, they can start bioaccumulating, right? So right now we're dealing with things like PFAS, which are basically the outputs of like Teflon and waterproofing in general. Those live in the environment indefinitely, and they could be not very harmful, but they are definitely still here. So laundering maybe can move them from your clothing to your water supply, but it's not really a benefit. Now, there are ones that are quite toxic, but they go away very fast. So toxicity is one, longevity is one, bioaccumulation is one. So there's different ways to think about the chemistry that exists in our systems, and laundering can help for some of those, but it is not a universal solution. So we just need to understand what's in it so that we know what's happening to it in the long run.
Wonderful. And then let's try and get to 2 more questions. The next one from Nancy. What kind of labels are already out there to aid consumers in making more responsible choices? And how are those labels held accountable to authenticity of information?
I love this question. So this is so hard, right? We have certifications, and we have a lot of good certifications in the kind of textile world, and specifically, you know, sports product is what I work on at the university. That's what my professional life has been about. So we have Blue Sign is a really good certification. OKO, which is OKEO, does a lot of sort of chemical toxicity. And all of these are the organizations that do the certification is the organization that holds brands responsible for meeting those certification standards. And certifications are very helpful for the consumer to understand what is happening, like how the product was made. But it is complicated because you could potentially do all of the right things, have a lovely supply chain that is perfect for human rights, perfect for chemistry, and not have a certification because the certification costs time and money and everything else. So you get certifications for larger organizations, but not smaller organizations. And it is just complicated. And because we have a global industry, we need legislation that is working at a global scale so that you can't sell textiles in the United States that have these issues associated with it. But then you also need to be able to have all of the resources to hold everyone accountable at a global scale. So it is complicated, and having the conversations we're having now where you can listen to your legislators talk about what they're trying to do, and you can listen to the experts talk about what's happening in the space. That's what we're doing right now with these webinars. So stay tuned and keep trying and find the things that matter to you and purchase accordingly.
And the last one we'll get to is from Monica. Is it a contaminant if it's purposely added, or just a toxin that is
Oh, I mean, definitions, we can go into definitions for a while. I think if it's not good for you, we should probably give it a bad name. But that might just be my personal opinion. And I think depending on the industry you're in, you will hear different terminologies for this. But I don't think anybody should be adding things to anything that we know is harmful to people.
Yeah, and just a quick note, I see a couple of questions coming through on the chat, so just a reminder to please put it into the Q&A. I can't track everything, but Monica was saying that sometimes it might be hidden, to submit a question, it might be hidden under the More icon, in case others are having an issue finding that. So the Q&A should be at the bottom, like black bar if you're on a desktop, and then it might be under More if you want to submit a question. Thank you all so much. And do we have our next speaker?
Is Eileen around?
Yes, I'm here.
Fabulous. Eileen. I am so excited to introduce Eileen. She is with us from an organization called Accelerating Circularity. And Accelerating Circularity, as I started my journey for researching and studying textile sustainability, I reviewed a lot of organizations, and when I found Accelerating Circularity, I was like, this is the database. This is the list of resources that I have been looking for the entire time I have been studying this. I cannot recommend enough looking at their website. And I'm super excited to have Eileen here to be able to introduce to you some more of the specifics of sort of the circularity world, and also introduce her organization, Accelerating Circularity. So thanks so much, Eileen. I'll give it over to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the very warm introduction, and happy to be here and sharing a little bit more about what we do. I had sent over a handful of slides. Oh, there they are. So we can move right to the next one. So Accelerating Circularity, we are an action-packed nonprofit. We're focused on textile-to-textile recycling systems at commercial scale. We work collaboratively and very stakeholder-led. Our mission is to build circular systems that turn used textiles into new raw materials. And we have a vision of a world in which textiles are no longer wasted. These are tall aspirations, but the key points here are we're focused on building those textile-to-textile recycling systems that are commercial, with brands and all across the supply chain so that we can shift the way that the industry operates today. Next slide. And I think this layers on to information already shared, but view it as our materials. All of our materials, that's all categories of materials, are outlasting the products and leading to this volume of textiles that we're trying to figure out what we can do with them next. So, thinking about the volume that is produced, this is production, 116 metric tons is produced globally on an annual basis. 93 million tons are going to landfill, again, global number. But in the US, we're still looking at 17 million tons going to landfill. And then this was pulled from some California metrics, 1.2 million tons. So I don't have the specific numbers on Washington, but it's going to be a large number. And on the right, the volume that's being produced, these percentages represent what's being produced. 63% of that 116 million tons being produced globally is polyester, 25% is cotton, and 7% is man-made cellulosics. Those are numbers from 2023. So that's reflective of a shift in how much more polyester we're using, but that doesn't ignore, we can't ignore that there's a huge volume of cotton that's also still out there that we can also still be doing something with. Next slide. So a little bit about kind of who's involved and how we can look at what are the steps that get the existing textiles into a recycling stream. So collectors, really valuable step in the process. Again, going back to the US data that is coming from directories that Accelerating Circularity maintains. Those are accessible on our website. But we've got about 80 collectors or collector sorters in the US. About 40 of those are Goodwill Industries, and those are all around the country. Then you've got to have a good availability of sorters and what we're referring to as pre-processors. So, your collectors are also looking for those resale opportunities. Your sorters may also be sorting for resale. And now we want to be able to bring more sorters along to have more options for how are we sorting the textiles that are out there to figure out different opportunities for those streams of textiles depending on the type of recycling that's possible. And then recognize, look, in recyclers, 25 textile recyclers in the US, we're going to need a lot more of those to be able to manage the volume that's in front of us of textiles that could be pulled into recycling streams. And we're going to need to look internationally at what is possible, because keep in mind, we still have a global textile industry. And I think it's important to recognize there's things that we can do, whether it's locally, regionally, nationally, but to really scale, we also need to be thinking globally. So looking at those textile recyclers, I also want to point out we're roughly a 50-50 split in the US between what is a mechanical recycler and a chemical recycler. Your mechanical recyclers, look, that's predominantly going to be cotton and then other fabrics, materials that need to just go into a, picture like rug pads, different forms of batting. That is not necessarily going to be something you're going to see a lot at retail. It's a little bit hidden, as well as insulation applications. And then your chemical recycling is more specifically toward synthetics or polycotton blends and that sort of thing. So at the bottom here, again, I mentioned the directories. We also have reports on the work that we've been doing that is building supply chains that foster how to put a supply chain together to be able to recycle different types of textiles, and building on the previous presentation with, all the pieces and parts. There's a lot of complexity to how particularly apparel is built today. And we want to build that into some of our trials. So that's the work that we're doing. The trials are really important for us to be able to address certain challenges, figure out ways that those challenges can be overcome, so that we're, again, building supply chains, building processes that allow the industry to move towards recycling and shifting away from a linear system that we have today. Next slide. So this is the last piece of information I want to share with you. What we refer to as a spent textile hierarchy, wanting to be able to create a framework that we work within. And then I want to point out it aligns with US EPA, the European Union's Waste Directive, as well as California's SB 707. We're looking to foster prevention first. How do we make sure that we are reducing the volume of textiles that are coming in, designed for durability? That we're increasing the collection so that we're avoiding landfill. We want to foster repair, renew, that then allows things to move into reuse and resale streams, and then move into recycling. We're focused on textile to textile recycling, but I want to reference, wipers, shoddy, that's some of them are also the nonwovens that I mentioned earlier, wanting to be able to increase the amount of reuse, as well as materials being viewed as a resource for new materials, whatever those new materials may be, because we've got a big shift that we're trying to happen here. If we are only at less than 15% of all textiles being recycled, when 95% of textiles are recyclable, that's really just flipping this whole system on its head. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing, and we look at the efforts of what you're doing in Washington as aligned with how we'd like to see things evolve as well. So that's what I had put together for all of you. I'm happy to take questions and provide more information where I can.
Thank you so much, Eileen. Do we have any questions? I don't see any in the Q&A. I know there were some in the chat, but I may have missed some of those.
I wanted to ask a question, and I can't type in the Q&A since I'm a co-host, so I'm just going to jump in and say
Sure.
Thank you. And also, I'm just curious, when you talked about your pilots or your trials, can you say more about that? And is there, what would it look like for Washington to move in that direction?
Sure. So the trials that we've done to date, we have worked alongside brands and wanted them to participate so that our end product is a product that's available at retail. So we have done trials that were specific to cotton, and the outcome of those trials was what we refer to as the Accelerating Circularity Blend. It is 20% post-consumer recycled, 20% post-industrial recycled, and then the balance would be new fiber. That type of opportunity is what we see as really a mechanism to shift how the industry behaves. where you're not trying to go to 100% recycled, but you're building the capacity to increase that percentage over time. Post-industrial is important because for textile recyclers, a known material, right? Known inputs, almost any process, you got to have known inputs to have a reliable, reproducible output. That's what we're creating in the trials. We are, the supply chain we're putting together is that collector, sorter, preprocessor, recycler. And then we go back into the typical partners in a linear production cycle for textiles, which is going to be your spinner, weaver, knitter, dyeing, finishing, cut and sew, and then the finished product. We work most closely with the brands on the latter piece because ideally we want to tap into their supply chains. That ups your likelihood of success. So a couple of examples, we've got a denim skirt that was launched by Target last fall using that accelerating circularity blend. We've also got a product that was launched by Wrangler. We worked with Cone Denim, which was sort of a known mill in the US that also still produces mostly in Mexico at this point. But that's the type of thing where we're really trying to build that know-how and then focus on building the capacity. To work with, say, the state of Washington, I think involvement in a trial, we have not explored that type of opportunity to date. It's interesting because it would have this, it would probably most focus on the collection side of it, but would be really fabulous to pull in a Washington-based brand as well, to really drive that whole point home of how this starts to impact the way that we think about the textiles that we're using, how we design them, how we want people to use them, and then reuse or move them into a recycling stream. So it's happy to talk further, but that would be an interesting opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to highlight, Tara asked that if the textile hierarchy is available somewhere. It's an amazing concept, and I really appreciate it. I think we can drop that link in the chat. And then we have a question from Christine Taylor. How is accelerating circularity collaborating and partnering across sectors and with EU entities that are further along than the US when it comes to circular models? And also part two, how are they seeing US brands support this shift?
Yeah, so just a note on the spent textiles hierarchy, that is available also on our website through the resources. And thank you for putting that into the chat. So in terms of the different sectors and how we're working, we are working across brands, both US and internationally, primarily the EU. And making sure that we are looking at things globally. We are able to take advantage of the kind of current situation where the EU is moving faster than where the US is at in terms of, EPR is further along, so we can certainly learn from that. There is a need to coordinate activity. We have a specific group in Europe. It is actually global, but more of them are based in Europe, of recyclers, where we want to be able to pull together the information that is most relevant, particularly for the chemical recycling, and making sure that we don't inadvertently put restrictions in place, say on allowed chemicals that then cut off existing and high volume recycling streams. So it's not to say that those won't be safe, because look, there's plenty of chemistry that is safe. but needing to recognize that some things may need a transition, because we don't want to start from scratch, right? Say, oh, we're only going to deal with recycling from here forward. We've got a high volume that we want to be able to find, appropriate uses for the textiles that are no longer in use. So we are a global organization. I would say that's primarily EU and North America. And did I miss a part of that question? Remind me if I did.
The second part was just how are they seeing US brands support this shift?
Yeah. So we do have a number of US brand partners. I mentioned Target already. We have worked with Walmart. We also work with Wrangler. Trying to think of who we've got a number of brands that are in active trials right now that it's not necessarily public information, but we always want more involvement and more brands to participate, but excited to see that it's both, really large retailers, and then I think it is the outdoor industry and the activewear industry in the US, I think, have more going on that we're also able to tap into, that their awareness of how to make sure that they're kind of being responsible brands and businesses makes them a great network for us to tap into.
Awesome. And Stephen mentioned Nike in the chat.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Awesome. And then we have a question from Banush, who is going to be my awesome co-host for the second webinar, which I hope you all can join. What are the biggest challenges in helping brands towards repair and reuse models?
I think for brands moving into, what they're gravitating towards first is resale. And whether they're doing it on their own or they're doing it through third parties. And look, they are most comfortable building revenue streams, engaging with their customers. That's what they do. And so it makes sense that they would start there. Having run one of those resale platforms in a previous life, much smaller scale, but what you start to understand is that if there's sell-through that's happening for a brand, it's really valuable for them to then increase the inventory that's available. And I do think it starts to lead towards conversations around what's possible for, they might call it refurbishment or repair. But there are leaders in that space. I think, so again, those outdoor brands are paving the way. But also, can reference that Lululemon has a pretty active repair business as well. And a lot of them see it as a service to their customers as well. It's great engagement, customer engagement, and so just see a lot of opportunity there. And then I think Steve and Bethel will mention this too, but those opportunities where you're doing collaborations with brands that feature kind of remade, reinvented product, that those are great opportunities as well to show what's possible. And each one of those that works, I think, gives brands incentive to try other new things.
Absolutely. We're doing like perfect here on time. I think we can maybe take one more question if we have any. I know that co-hosts are unable to put questions into the chat, unfortunately. But do we have one more question? And if not, we will have our little bio break before our panel discussion. Well, I think, yeah, that looks like everything. Thank you so much, Eileen. Really appreciate it. And love the work that you're
happy to
doing.
be here. Thanks. Thank you.
Here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. All right, well, we're going to take a break. Do you know the time frame we have available for our break?
I think we had originally scheduled 5 minutes, but I think we can do a little bit more. I see one question popped up. So do you want to take this question, Eileen?
Let's add it to the end. And if Eileen, you don't mind sticking around for us, we'll, after our panel, we can consolidate any outstanding questions that we have and tackle them all then. Wonderful. Well, I can see you guys here. And so part of what I really wanted to do with this panel is understand the sort of post-consumer landscape. So when I talk to people about textiles, we get a lot of questions. We got some of them in this meeting already about what do I do with the things that I am no longer using? And so there's a few avenues that consumers take. You know, we throw things away or we donate them, and we're trying to figure out ways of making that happen. But then once consumers do that, it can often be a bit of a black box as to what happens to those textiles and where they go. So you all were invited here to discuss basically and help illuminate what actually happens in the sort of post-consumer landscape. But before we get into questions on that subject, I really would love to have you guys introduce yourself. And we have slides that you can talk over, so you don't have to do anything else, but I'm gonna go ahead and take it in the order that our slides are. So Stephen, if you don't mind introducing yourself and your organization and what your organization does.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate this. My name is Steve Bethel. I'm the co-founder of a family of companies called Bank and Vogue. We are based in the proudly independent and not yours Canada. Just our prime minister is meeting your president today, so we have to bring this up. But our company has for 25 years participated and worked in the post-consumer space. It says in the entrance of our office, innovative and relevant solutions to the crisis of stuff. So shortly, just very quickly, we buy secondhand goods from charities and private collectors across the United States, including Washington State, and we find homes for them and innovative uses. So we do sell to resale markets. We have a chain of stores across Europe, which are called Beyond Retro, which sells American vintage in European stores. We have an upcycling division where we cut up old clothes and we make new clothes. And we do collabs like this shoe, which is made from a red and black Chuck flannel shirt. We're making the uppers for the Chuck Taylor shoe, which is Converse is actually owned by Nike. So we're really proud of that work. But lastly, as a company, we not only find homes for resales, we find homes for retail and upcycling, but we are also supplying material for fiber to fiber recycling. So we're one of the largest suppliers to some denim mills that people might know in the room, that if you go and buy a pair of jeans from your local retailer, some of that fiber in those jeans comes from Bank and Vogue. So basically, we're in the space of this celebrated space of secondhand.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stephen. And Kerwin, would you mind introducing yourself and your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kerwin Pyle, he, him pronouns, environmental programs managing supervisor for King County. And I've been with King County for almost 18 years now. And really, I've been pretty much from day one into reuse and prevention, starting off in our parts room up at Cedar Hills and trying to find efficiencies there and really right-sizing inventories and that kind of thing, on into being the project manager for our recycling operations at all of our transfer stations, 10 transfer stations. And now as a a supervisor of that group, really focusing on our Replus initiative, which includes reuse, recycle, all of the good things. And excuse me. It's a really far encompassing program that includes upstream, in the stream, and downstream, including textiles. And textiles are a thing that I don't know. I've got it. They're in my heart. We need to do something with them, and I'm excited to be part of this.
Well, thank you so much, Kerwin. I appreciate that. And Sydney, would you mind giving us your intro?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about Goodwill and our mission work, and then I'd also love to talk a little bit about our flow too. So I'll provide a bit of an overview of Goodwill Industries International. Hi everyone, my name is Sydney Munoz. I'm the Manager of Sustainability at Goodwill Industries International. We're a membership services organization that supports 152 autonomous local Goodwill organizations that are located across the United States and Canada. And each local Goodwill is a registered 501c3 nonprofit. They all have their own mission programs that are tailored to meet their own community's needs. So many of you all may know us for our thrift stores, and if so, thanks for either shopping or donating to Goodwill. Your donations really go to fuel our mission, which is to provide workforce development, job training, and career advancement opportunities for individuals that face challenges to employment. And last year, we served more than 2.1 million individuals across the United States and Canada, making a really significant impact on the communities that we serve. So Goodwill has a pretty large footprint across the United States and Canada. We have over 3,300 stores and donation centers, which in the US, we have a store or donation center within 10 miles of 83% of the US population, which I think is a really benefit to the circular economy and being close to drop-off points, et cetera. And we've been doing this for over 120 years. And last year, we recovered the value of over 4.4 billion pounds of used goods, ranging from everything from textiles, what we're here to talk about today, to kitchen items, books and electronics, artwork, furniture, and more. So I'll talk a little bit about our resale channels and kind of as you drop off a donation to Goodwill, what would happen to that donation. So we have multiple resale channels that keep our items in use, including our retail stores, boutiques. Some Goodwills operate boutiques, e-commerce, and then outlet stores where heavily discounted items are typically sold by the pound. And then throughout the process, each item is carefully evaluated to kind of understand where it would go within our retail channels. And after exhausting all of our retail channels, leftover product is then sold in bulk to buyers and brokers who would then sort and grade the material into different categories for either resale, recycling, export domestically or internationally. This is really a centuries-old industry for folks around the world to kind of find a home for items that don't sell within the secondhand retail market. And Stephen just gave their introduction. And one example of this is Mick and Vogue. And Stephen and other players are really critical solutions for the global textile circular economy. But we know that despite our impact and the impact of the sector, that textiles represent one of the largest growing waste streams in the US. Eileen, I had this stat as well, and she mentioned it that 17 million tons of textiles are entering the waste stream in the US every year. So we know that's a large problem, and we're wanting to do something to help tackle that. And so at Goodwill, our vision is to really set the global standard for product stewardship by providing measurable positive impacts on people, planet, and prosperity. And our aim is really for post-retail textiles to go to verifiable, traceable markets with minimal waste and positive impacts on communities around the world. And then at Goodwill, we really follow the waste hierarchy, the zero waste hierarchy, and we always want to make sure that we're prioritizing reuse first. But we know that not everything is designed or made to reuse. I know Carly mentioned that in her introduction. And so that's where our whole textile circularity ecosystem comes into play to really develop solutions that are circular, traceable, and scalable. And I'll end by kind of providing a little bit of a stat that that we've uncovered over 2.5 years of studies. So we've been engaging with a number of different studies. We engaged with Accelerating Circularity on one of these studies to really understand what is the fiber composition of our post-retail textiles. And so we have a database of over 400,000 garments that we were able to test for fiber composition and content, which is the largest database of its kind. And it shows that 60% of Goodwill's post-retail textiles can be recycled. So this was a really interesting stat, and I think can help us and hopefully the ecosystem as we're thinking about textile circularity and recycling initiatives. So thanks for the opportunity, and happy to answer questions or dive more into the work that we do.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Thank all of you. So Sydney, you did a great job of explaining sort of how textiles come to your organization, and being able to have consumers drop things off at various Goodwill locations. I think that stat that 83% of Americans live within 10 miles of a Goodwill drop-off, I think that's really impressive. So I feel like that's very clear how the textiles ends up in your world. And I'd like to open it up to Kerwin and Stephen for a minute. When I release my textiles, how do they end up in your hands? What is the actual pathway to you guys?
Well, so the pathway for King County Solid Waste is at our transfer stations. We have Goodwill collection boxes there at most of them. And the materials come into us. It's not really sorted on the way in. It's not really well governed as to what's going in those boxes. But for the most part, people do follow our directions, our signs that we have out there, and our promotional materials that direct them to put in the clean, no mildew. Rips and tears are okay. Single shoes, okay. But for the most part, we're aiming for reusable, clean products. We're not looking to be a dumping ground for free. And so Goodwill does come and pick up. They service our locations. And it's, they show up in a truck with a couple of people in there, and they move the containers back and forth or empty them out, depending on how things are organized in the boxes. And then they go to the central hub downtown Seattle. It all comes to Evergreen Goodwill right here in the CID, essentially. We ask for tonnage reports to find out, how many pounds or how many tons are being picked up and processed. And I've got a slide later if we want to look at that that shows what we do per year. But I can tell you, we're just scratching the surface. There's so much out there.
So if I was to put something in my trash can at the curb, would that end up with you, or does that go elsewhere?
Yeah, so commercially collected kind of refuse, yeah, it would end up in our in one of our transfer stations, and then end up going up to Cedar Hills Regional Landfill.
And so there's nobody that's sorting that out of my trash and putting it in Goodwill containers.
Nope, that'd be up to you.
Understood. And how about you, Stephen? How does it go from an average consumer to your hands?
Yeah, so Bank of Vogue, for 25 years, we've bought from private collectors and charities across the United States, including Washington State. So typically when people donate their clothes to a charity, there's two paths. One is that the charity will put the product out on the shop floor. They usually go through it, put 50% of what people donate, and typically sell about 50% of what goes on the floor. So the irony is that if you give a 10-pound bag of that lovely suit jacket you're wearing, and if there's 10 other things, they'll typically sell 2.5 items out of a 10-item lot. And so what we do is we buy from the charities the material that is donated, because the reality is and this is something that's not talked about enough about. I mean, I know from Goodwill's perspective, the one thing that's really quite magical about the beginning of a journey of circularity is that it creates the ability for these social enterprises to do good in society. Because if people donate their clothes, then whether it be the Goodwill or whether it be the Salvation Army or whether it be the Kidney Foundation, or in Denver, Colorado, it's the ARC who help kids with Down syndrome. There are so many amazing social enterprises across the United States that are dependent on people's donations of their clothes. And they're not only dependent on the donations of the clothing, but they're dependent on people going to a thrift store and buying secondhand, and also dependent on companies like Bank and Vogue, who buy 75% of what people donate. In other words, and in some cases, some charities have so much product that they sell the originals. So for many Goodwills, they'll literally have too much product that we will actually buy what we refer to as the originals. That's the unsorted product. That it's just as it comes in. But I think the one thing that we should celebrate, because these are times when we need to find areas of celebration, is that by donating your clothes to a charity, really it's the beginning of helping a social enterprise. And that's, obviously the Goodwill is one amazing story, but on Saturday night at 2:00 in the morning, I'm not handing out sandwiches and coffee to the homeless. And as we can see, I was just in Portland last week. This is a really important part of circularity. It's not just about the landfills. It's not just about carbon. It's not about saving. The first step is actually participating in a social society. I don't know. I'm just quite passionate about this because it's something that I'm proud as a company for 25 years that we've supported these charities like the Goodwill or Salvation Army or name it in your local enterprise.
I think that's really good to highlight. And I believe strongly, and this is a big part of, what we were looking at in designing these webinars, is the fact that we are a social society, as you put it. Like, this is a collaborative effort, and it requires all of us sort of participating in it and thinking highly of the other people in our system, and whether that's the people we see in our day-to-day community or the people who are building textiles. So having that opportunity to connect folks and allow us to work together is really what we're here to do. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And I would just love to put out the question, what are the misconceptions that you guys are dealing with when you talk to consumers about their textiles? What's the biggest misconception that comes up for you?
I'm being Canadian polite and letting the other people answer first.
Kerwin, let's start with you.
You bet. Thanks, Steve. So I think the biggest misconception is that there's no value in what they've got in their bag. When people come to our transfer station, and even when they come into our big recycling areas, and they've got their cardboard boxes or some scrap metal or an appliance, whatever it is they're going to be recycling. And if they've got a bag of old textile stuff in the back of their truck or their station wagon or whatever they might have showed up in, their SUV, they just think it's garbage. They're just there to throw it away, right? And we deal with that when it comes to bottles and cans too. There's a lot of that misconception of that it's just all going to the garbage anyway. There's no real recycling going on. If I put my ripped up T-shirt into that textile bin, it's just going to go to the landfill. Or if I put my this T-shirt is old, it's kind of worn. Maybe it was a cool concert T-shirt at one time, but now it's got no value. We have to almost fight with them to disagree. And say, no, you should put it in the textile bin because somebody really might want that Pink Floyd T-shirt from 1979.
Yeah, fabulous. How about you, Sydney? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions?
Yeah, I think Kerwin did a great job at answering it from the individual community members' perspective. I'll kind of talk about it from, I think, like the brand's perspective. I think in like a lot of conversations on the circular economy, a lot of folks are kind of saying, we need to build collection infrastructure. Collection infrastructure is the thing that we need to build up. But I think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. I said the stat about Goodwill, we have 3,300 stores and donation centers, but then then there's also, like Stephen mentioned, lots of other nonprofit thrift operators across the country. And so I think collection infrastructure is built, but it's how do we utilize the collection infrastructure that's already built to be able to get more materials. There's stats out there from the EPA that 85% of textiles go to landfill in the US. And so would love to uncover more of that as they release more data. But I think from the brand's perspective, there is collection infrastructure here and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's something that Goodwill's interested in. How do we partner with individuals on textile circularity, but others too, other type of item circularity for other items, that we do have the collection infrastructure available. Could we do more? Yes, but I think we do have a wide range covered.
Fabulous. How about you, Stephen?
I think the biggest challenge we have as an industry is finding some of the false narrative that piles of clothes head to foreign away places and just end up in big piles somewhere or being burned randomly. And that certainly is the case in certain jurisdictions. But for example, in Kenya, there was a study done by the UN, written by Jennifer Wang, that did an analysis of all of the bales, sorted bales of used clothes that are ending up in Kenya. And the non-wearables represented less than 2% of the clothes. Number two is that, what's really crazy is that there's 2 million people in Kenya alone employed in the secondhand clothing trade. And so I'm not only exuberant about the industry because of the social aspects or social aspects within the United States or Canada. In other words, you donate clothes, the charities there's a benefit. But really, the other thing that's quite quietening is that most of the people take a Kenya or take a Guatemala. Guatemala is the second largest importer of used clothes from the United States. The majority of people in the trade are women. And literally and if you go to Guatemala and drive outside of Guatemala City, you'll see somebody that has like a little hair salon. And outside of her hair salon, she'll have like 3 rails of clothes. So she's like cutting hair during the day, but somebody can come along and do some shopping. And I think that the power and mobility of secondhand clothes within developing economies is an unspoken kind of superpower. And certainly something that I, as a lived experience of 25 years of going to markets around the world, the ability to give somebody an enterprise to be able to make a living and do something. And to Kerwin's point, I'd also just kind of quickly point out the fact that if you're picking coffee beans in the mountains of Guatemala, you don't necessarily need a perfect winter coat, but you want some kind of coat because it's really cold picking up in the mountains of Guatemala. And so the Western definition of perfect doesn't necessarily have to be, and so you could see somebody, going to the transfer station and saying, "Oh, I spilled my latte on this coat. No one's going to want it." But the reality is that a little bit of latte stain isn't really affecting the coffee bean picker. He or she just wants to be warm. So I don't know. The 3 quick points about the misconception is, one is that used clothing done right creates jobs around the world. Number 2 is that it really does create upward mobility for particularly women in a lot of developing countries. And number 3, the definition of what is good is very contextual. And one has to not be hubris about that,
This leads me directly into the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is, do you have anything that you want to say about the quality of textiles or the change of the quality of textiles over time?
It's funny, as I've been doing this for 25 years, the great lament is the amount of synthetics that have moved into the textile industry. So now cotton production has been going down every year for the last 15 years. And at least as somebody who sorts and celebrates used clothes, I'm lamentful about all of the Shein and Temu material that come into. I work for a private company, so I can say their name. You guys can't. And it is a celebratory moment that the U.S. government recently has passed the closing the de minimis rule, and it's not just one of the things one of the things that is lost on the conversation about the closing the de minimis rule. It's not just
Will you take 2 seconds and explain what that is for those who don't know?
Yeah, sorry. So in the US, you can buy, and in Canada, you can buy something online, and if it's under $800, you didn't have to pay any tax or duty or customs. And the challenge with that is that some companies have figured out a way to send clothing directly from their factories, whether it be in China or Vietnam, and in so doing, they've created apps on their phone where they've created these hyper efficient models to be able to land a blouse in Spokane, Washington for $8. Now, the irony is that $3 or $4 of that $8 is actually air freight. But the real challenge with that is that basically people are sending by mail a bazillion packages. And the real challenge isn't just the quality of the clothes, but it's also the lack. So the amazing thing about the US and Europe is that there are standards that are set about chemical testing, so that you're going to make sure that the clothes you wear is free of NPOs, it's free of cadmium, it's free of things that if you lick it, your nose will fall off. So the challenge with this modern model of the de minimis rule, people just mailing stuff in, it's not just that the quality has gone down, but the chemical composition of the clothes that are coming don't even hit a standard. And so you being in Oregon, Nike it really leads the charge on RSL testing. This is restricted substance list, and really lays out very, very clearly above national standards what can be in a garment or not in a garment. So often the conversation about the direct mail programs from Asia is about the quality of the clothes, which is really a negative for somebody flooding. So I being a Canadian, I think about beavers, and the challenge with low quality clothes, the hyper fast fashion, is that it's lowering the quality of the ecosystem that goes out there. So for whether it be the Goodwills or whether it be a Bank and Vogue, if the quality of the clothes keeps going down and the chemical content is in question, or the U.S. has the anti-slavery law, which means that the American companies can't buy, for example, Shenzhen cotton because it's been known to have slavery around it. Then if companies can find ways around these considered laws, it's really problematic. And
yeah,
so
I'm going to have to I'm going to pass it over to somebody else just to keep us going. I appreciate it, Steward.
That's right.
Sydney, do you have anything to say about quality and textiles that Goodwill receives?
Yeah, I'd say I'd agree with what Stephen had mentioned, fast fashion, but then also in the last few years, ultra fast fashion, which is just a new term that's come online. Like that really is difficult for the resale economy, as Stephen mentioned, because we want to keep items in use for as long as possible, but especially ultra fast fashion, those items are not intended to be kept in use for as long as possible. There's some statistics out there that the average item is worn less than 7 times, or on average 7 times, which is a really scary number. But I think that also has an impact with reusability. So Kerwin, you had a great example of a vintage Pink Floyd band t-shirt. Like, even if that's stained or ripped, like, people want that. That's cool. Like, that's something that has value. And the ultra fast fashion, that kind of throws a little bit of a wrench into the reusability of things and the longevity of items. So that's something we've been seeing coming online in the past few years.
Yeah. How about you, Kerwin?
Yeah, being a receiver of it and not really seeing what's going to Goodwill. I don't know if I have a whole lot to add, but I can tell you from personal experience and friends' experience, anecdotal experience. Yeah, the stuff coming over from Shein and Temu are just, they're just garbage. I'm sorry. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying that, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It is for sure. So the last question that I want to end on for you guys is, if there's one thing you could ask from consumers, what is your action item that you request from the rest of us? Anyone can start?
I'd be happy to start. I think that prioritizing when you're thinking about your clothing and your donations, making sure that you're prioritizing nonprofit thrift. I know that was mentioned before, and I appreciate that call out. Is, nonprofit thrift like Goodwill and others within the space, we really do really good work with the donations that we get. Last year helped 2.1 million people find employment. So I think finding your local Goodwill and or other nonprofit thrift, being sure to support those. And if something is ripped, like that band t-shirt, like, donate it and we can try to find the best use for it. I think that would be my other suggestion as well, to make sure that we're keeping those items out of landfill and in circulation, upcycling, downcycling, reusable opportunities. But donating it to a nonprofit thrift would be kind of my call to action and request for folks.
How about you, Kerwin?
Well, Carly, I would say I'd like to reiterate what you said earlier. Buying less, but quality things, because it's a burden at our transfer stations to manage the boxes, to make sure that there's not vectors getting in there, and sometimes they get overflowing. That is actually a huge problem at our locations. People will just start putting the bags on the ground because the things are just so full, and it just seems like it's a tsunami of fast fashion coming in, and faster fashion too. It sounds like ultra fast fashion. Yeah, buy less, buy better quality, and then donate when you're done. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Stephen, take it home.
It's just to be different. I would encourage people to participate in democracy. In California, they've proposed and passed what's called SB 707, which is an EPR bill. And I know there's going to be another webinar on EPR, but get involved with your government to, put your foot down and say, hey, if companies want to sell clothes within my state, my county, my region, then they need to be responsible for helping with infrastructure to be able to pick that up. But I think the biggest thing from the democracy point of view is that if we can get brands to put recycled fiber and mandate that recycled fiber is in products, if we can mandate circularity, because it's not going to happen with the invisible hand. Recycling costs money, running the transfer station costs money, running Goodwill costs money. We need good legislation that's considered, that thinks beyond the immediate resources and thinks about the carbon impact of what we do and what we buy.
Wonderful. Right. I really appreciate that. It is exactly the work that needs to be done. And I also will add to that my own, which is to talk to the other people that you work with. If you have materials you're getting rid of, go talk to the people who are accepting it. If you're buying materials, talk to the people that you're buying it from. And then if they can tell you who's making the thing that they're selling, go talk to those people as well. There's a lot to be learned from each other and a lot of ways that we can collaborate and make these efficiencies happen that are yet to be discovered and yet to be explored. So I think we have a lot of opportunities. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our panel, and I'm going to invite Eileen to join us again, and as well as our folks within RMDC. And we're going to open it up to questions from the audience for any of the folks who have spoken today. And if you want anyone to elaborate on anything, please just let us know. And I'll let T highlight the things that are have come to the top, and we can go through those questions. Thank you guys so much for your time on this panel. I really appreciate it. I think it was very illuminating.
Great. So thank you so much, panelists. And Eileen, welcome back. I think the first question is for Eileen from Kate. How do you recommend approaching companies for taking their garments that could be repaired and resold?
Is that from, say, a consumer point of view, or from just as a initiative across the state of Washington?
I'm not quite sure, Kate, if you wanted to throw in the chat which perspective you're wanting an answer from.
And maybe you could tackle it from both sides if you have an opinion.
I was thinking the same, Carly.
We do. Also, I want to make sure that we're able to get to all the questions, and I also have some questions, so.
Sure, keep it brief. Look, I think brands don't know that consumers want it unless you ask for it. So if you think something should be repaired, go ask for it. From a sort of broader perspective of how to get more repair in action, there are great repair services out there. There's actually a lot of people doing tailoring and that sort of thing. And I would tap into that to see what could be built that makes those folks more visible. So that you're starting to just build. We've lost that sense of, shoe repair, clothing repair, and yet the skill set's there. Might be lost if we don't use it, but it's there.
Yeah, and we do actually have, so Kate actually, typed out a larger question. So my full question is about partnering with garment manufacturers that may have damaged and or irregular garments, dead stock fabric, or fabric scraps. Our nonprofit focuses on creative reuse, diversion, and mending, and our community of makers are always so interested in materials that can be reused and repaired. We would like to build connections with US-based manufacturers outside of our small city. Do you have recommendations for approaching companies that may be interested in extending the end of life of their products? And I would love to know, Kate, what your nonprofit is.
So there is definitely some options on that, and I think it is, I don't know of an organization that you'd be able to go to and find all of those options. I think it is approaching individual companies that you find out about. And there are some, like I think Queen of Raw is one of them, but she's selling that material. So there's opportunities out there. I know that Fab Scrap is used by a lot of folks too, where they're gathering. Do they have instances where they have too much and they need other opportunities? That's a possibility.
Yeah, and I would also say, just go talk to people. It's amazing how many people are open to chatting with you about things, and people often feel concerned. I tell my students this all the time, like, just call somebody up. And even if it's not the right phone number, it'll direct you to the person that you want to talk to. Send out that email, follow up on the customer service line, whatever it is that you can do to reach out to these people, just talk to them, tell them what you're thinking. And it's amazing what you can get going.
Sorry, I have to turn off my audio when I'm typing. So the next question is from Christine. How do you all see AI playing a positive part or innovation for collecting and sorting in Washington, Oregon, or the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the first stab at that. I think that AI can play a big role in this, especially when we think about sorting for textiles to meet recyclers' specific needs. So thinking about like automated sorting technologies that would look at a fiber and say, this is cotton, this is polyester, sort by fiber composition, sort by color. And then there's also technologies using AI that can make patches out of the fabric and then basically detrim it, so take off buttons, zippers, seams, etc. So I think that within the space, AI in that space could be very, very helpful. So we've done a number of studies, the 400,000 garments that we've looked at, a lot of those were using hand scanners. So Matoha, sort tile scanners, near infrared scanners where you place a textile on top of a scanner to understand the fiber composition and color. But if we're thinking about setting up a system like this at large scale, we won't be able to do scanning each individual item by hand. And so I think that's where AI comes into play here. And Goodwill sees this as an opportunity to really upskill our current workforce as well, providing opportunities for folks to get upskilling with using AI, with using automation and technology, bringing on engineers onto the team. So I think that it has a really big role to play within that sorting for the non-wearable recycling feedstock to meet recyclers' various feedstock specifications.
Did anyone else want to answer? All right. If not, then the next question is coming from Monica. If an item is damaged, not wearable, but still usable for other textile use, should that be sorted or labeled differently for donation?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one as well. So that is a really interesting thing. We've had one of our Goodwill members start to test this out and pilot it, asking their community members if they do have damaged items to kind of separate that out and label it. It's not something that is being piloted kind of throughout the network since we're still learning from that first pilot, but I think that it's definitely an interesting point. So if you do have items, feel free to label them, and then that way our team in the back room can kind of know and make it a little bit easier of a sorting process. So I appreciate the question, and it's something that is just kind of a larger part of our circularity kind of initiative, kind of thinking about how do we, talk with the community about what to donate and how to donate. So I'd say, yeah, if you'd like to, feel free to, label it and best find a home for it.
Yeah, I'd just pile on as well. 20% of the textiles that we get, the mixed rags that has been through a thrift store, is cut up for wipers. So the iron, and we go back to the value hierarchy that was brought up by Accelerating Circularity. It's really an important part of the textile circularity journey that even if something is damaged, it's a bath towel or it's a t-shirt or a sweatshirt. One of the real important uses is wipers. Like anybody's painting the garage or whatever, that's important that that's part of the ecosystem. So that my 2 cents is that everything should go together, because one person's definition of not wearable is not another's, but it's also that it could get triaged into a myriad of things. The irony is one of the biggest problems in our industry is not necessarily condition, but it's size. Being a Canadian, I can make fun of Americans. One of the big problems we have is a lot of clothes come that are size 38 pants, 40-inch pants, 42-inch pants, and there's no world market for those pants. So something might be really, really in good condition, but not be marketable worldwide. So I think, just throw everything together.
I also have always been curious about, there are a lot of traditional reuse objects like crafting that is done in the world. And the fact that people are still buying rag rugs, like you get a rag rug to put in your kitchen or whatever. Those rag rugs are almost entirely made in other parts of the globe. And so we're exporting textiles and then we're re-importing these products. And it does make me wonder if there is an opportunity for some of the stuff that is not quite fiber to fiber recycling, but is no longer really usable as apparel. Is there something we can do in the United States? Is there opportunities for entrepreneurship or even supporting entrepreneurship?
Yeah, a couple of our Goodwills actually do, basically they take those items, especially the items that are non-rewearable and absorbent, so towels, etc., and package them up to make, like towels that you can clean throughout your home. It's a part of some of our mission programs, which is really interesting, and then they sell those within the store as well, especially for the items that are just, have low likelihood of selling, like those really used towels, but they would still be good for reuse and other kind of things. So that kind of reminded me of that innovation that a couple of our Goodwills are piloting and testing out and selling within their stores.
Yeah. And just one other addition in the home space is there are a couple of mills. There's Capel Rugs and Colonial Mills that make the braided rugs. So a little bit different from some of the other constructions that you see with the used materials, but they have both had recycled material collections at different points in time. I think it comes down to also creating the demand for those things too.
Yep.
Also, just to throw out, the celebration is that textiles is a global problem, but also a global opportunity. So I think it's fantastic that rag rugs are made in India and sold across the US, just as I think it's fantastic that, India is now making your iPhone. So I think I think that there's a celebration in the globalness of this problem. And for sure, there's some amazing business opportunities, both domestic, but there's also opportunities domestic and international.
We've got a grantee because Solid Waste Division has grants that it puts out, and the Refugee Artisan Initiative here in Washington State. It's a really innovative, cool program where they're taking textiles and creating really cool bags and apparel and even down to using hospital blue wrap to make scrunchies. I mean, it's the initiative is there.
Yeah, it's such cool stuff. I also love how this one question spawned a whole range of opportunities and answers. Let's see if we can get through a couple of more before we call it a day.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kate, I just wanted to call out her nonprofit is Ragfinery. I actually emailed you yesterday. But the last question that we have queued up is from Susan, and then I also have a question or two. So do we have good markets for wiping rags, absorbents, and shoddy in the US and Canada? And are they in certain parts of the country?
I'm happy to answer that if it's helpful. So the wiper industry. So I'm a board member of something called SMART, Secondary Materials Recycling, and SMART members make up a group of both rag graders, but also wiper people from across the United States. So I think if you go into your Home Depots or your local paint stores, the wiper industry is literally 100 years old in the US and is very robust and active in every corner of the US. The biggest challenge with that industry is that as more synthetics get into the rag mix, it's a harder and harder industry to go on. And then because of that, there are non-wovens that are coming into the trade and paper products that are competing against rags just because of the availability of cotton. But it's absolutely a critical part of circularity, and it's a critical part of the landscape.
Did anybody else want to answer that? Okay, so my first question is for Sydney. You talked about prioritizing nonprofit thrift, but for me, there's always been this question of scale. And Goodwill seems to get a lot of the donations. locally and nationally, right? So are you ever overwhelmed by textiles, and would you advocate for people to donate to smaller, more local nonprofit thrift organizations because there might be an issue with the scale of donations that you're receiving?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you. I'd say that donations are really the lifeblood of Goodwill. It supports all of our mission programs, and so we really appreciate any donations that we get, and we try to make the best use out of them possible. So I'd say if you have donations and you want to consider donating to Goodwill to donate to us, I'd say we have the localness of our communities is really important. So each local community has their own mission services programs that are catered to meet their own needs of that local community. So up in Rochester, New York, they have a really great mission program focused on folks that are blind and visually impaired. There's lots of other cool mission programs and innovations. So I'd say that even though we do have that national reach, all of our mission programs are put out by the local community within that state or county or region, really tailored to meet the local community's needs. So those really fuel the lifebloods of our local nonprofits, and 152 of them. So as much as you can, we'd always appreciate your donations, and that really fuels all of our programs.
So are there local Goodwills that are maybe getting fewer donations in terms of textiles, or maybe some that are overwhelmed by textile donations? Do you know about either end?
Yeah, I say, our donations ebb and flow throughout the year. So it kind of ebbs and flows. Some in like Florida, for example, it might be harder to get donations when it's super hot outside, or Arizona. And then, when you're thinking about the northern states, when it's snowy, we get a lot less, potentially less donations just from, how people are wanting to clean out their closets and or go to the store. So that kind of ebbs and flows. We also, have this network. And so if there are Goodwills that are needing additional donations, there are kind of opportunities for Goodwills to provide that to another Goodwill locally. But I'd say that none of the Goodwills are extremely overwhelmed right now with textiles, and we're always looking for more donations, at least at like the national level is really what we're hearing.
Okay, awesome. And my last question was kind of about, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but it's more to Stephen's point about creating business opportunities in like resale and exporting markets. For some things that I've heard, about like waste colonialism, in Ghana and Chile, whatever the country may be, is that donations suppress, or very cheap clothes suppress local manufacturing markets. So the idea that like a developing country could resell products is actually may be harming their local manufacturing capabilities, because it's very hard to compete with free or very cheap products. So maybe this is more of a macroeconomic issue, because we're seeing an overflow of cheaper or lower quality products entering the market, right, and more synthetics. So do you have a response to how like us exporting from like the first world to developing markets can not only help provide these opportunities like you're saying, but also help encourage manufacturing on a global level, or well, locally on a global scale?
Yeah, so just it's like a lot to chat about and not not go over. But number one, there are customers in Ghana asking and buying this product, so it's not like we're just shipping it, not charging it. A typical used container sent to Ghana is about $40,000. The freight rate is about $8,000. The duty is about $30,000. So a container is about $80,000. So it's far from free. Somebody's going to buy that container, and then they're going to sell off small bales to small traders, who then are going to resell them. And so, the problem with that, and that creates an economy, and it's fantastic. The alternative to that is we ban used clothes, like in South Africa, used clothes is banned to be shipped into. But the number one seller of clothes in South Africa is not South African manufacturers, it's Shein. And so Shein has actually financed a lot of the propaganda that has come out against the used clothing business in Ghana. And they've given a grant of $5 million a year to an organization that's saying, hey, used clothes is a bad idea. But the way I personally look at it is that the world doesn't need to make more clothes. We don't mean to make anything more. We need to just globally reuse the stuff we've got. And the real problem we have is we don't have an end after the end. I use something and then you wear it, then somebody else wears it. Where is the opportunity to turn it back into a new thing? And that's why the circular economy and the amazing work that Accelerating Circularity is doing is to try to create this circle rather than a linear model. And I think that, and I also think that you get regional specialization, right? Where you've got, the people of Ghana are amazing at oil. They're one of the largest oil producers in West Africa, but they're also producers of chocolate and cocoa. So they're going to have a specialty as a nation. Whereas you get somebody like in Ethiopia, they've got the amazing fertile valley along the Nile. I'm not sure that always, that it's always about necessarily everything doesn't have to be always about local. It's just a balance between the two. I think that's really important. But that's just one Canadian's opinion.
It's a big conversation. Sorry to pose that to you and as we're wrapping up, but thank you for that. I think it's really important to recognize that, yes, we don't need more stuff. We have so many resources that are already available. We have more than enough clothing for the next 6 generations, right? So there's more than enough. So I just wanted to synthesize some key takeaways. Thank you to everyone, to all the panelists and to my co-host, Carly, and for everybody at Ecology for putting this together. This has been really wonderful. For me, I think it's really important to center environmental justice in any environmental work. So people have to be centered and considered in all of our work that's in regards to sustainability and environmentalism. So some other key takeaways, like visual mediums are powerful forms of activation, but it's really easy for people to get stuck. But there are a lot of opportunities for cross-industry collaboration between brands, users, and recyclers. And we all need to collaborate as collaboration is essential to a successful shift to circularity. We also talked a bit about waste hierarchies and textile hierarchies. And the textile hierarchy in particular is a tool for everyone to reference as we rethink how we bring materials into our homes and businesses and what happens to them over time. There's lots of opportunity for innovation from a technological point of view. And as Kerwin mentioned, people believe their trash has no value. I think we heard a couple of people say that, but outputs or waste can be inputs or raw materials for new businesses. And we had some action items from our panelists. Sydney was asking that we prioritize nonprofit thrift. Kerwin asked that we buy fewer but quality, and Stephen suggested that we participate in democracy. So those are really great action items for everybody to consider. But just again, thank you to our speakers and panelists and for everybody for participating. We'd love your feedback, so please do fill out that short survey that's linked in the chat. And then we also have a link for the registration for webinar number 2, which will be on this Thursday, May 8th from 10 to 12:30 Pacific time. And we'll be hearing from circular textile businesses. Thank you all so much. Have a great day. Carly, anything you wanted to add?
Just I wanted to extend the thank you to you as well, T. Thanks for being our host and our through line through these webinars, and we look forward to seeing you next Thursday.
Thank you, everybody.